Hi there, everyone. This is the Raven's Librarian, and I'll be discussing episode 5 of the One Piece live action adaptation. As with the other videos, I will do my utmost to keep discussions of things regarding episodes that go after this one and things that happen in the anime and manga beyond that out of the discussion. If I accidentally mention something, I apologize, but I'll try to keep it as far away from that. This will just be discussing what's gone before in the live action and how this episode and the previous ones cover stuff from the anime and the manga. I'm coming at this from a fan of this series. So, in episode 5, if the previous episodes were kind of going back and forth between adapting what happens in the other versions and doing their own thing, if people were like divided on that, like this is the one episode where it definitely like veers the hardest, not in a good or bad way necessarily, I think that's up for discussion, but like it definitely does in terms of like what it chooses to keep from the original and what it's choosing to outright change and do away with from the previous one. So starting with the very basic stuff, the whole Mihawk and Don Krieg thing, that has to be the most WTF moment for people who weren't already, expecting it or weren't like aware of behind the scenes stuff, and just seeing this arc-long event from the anime and manga just have the live action just go, yeah, no, we're not doing that. And it's both humorous, but in earnest, it's so badass just watching this version of Mihawk just go to absolute town on these people. Just the way they introduce him too. They keep using the bounty system thing, but in this case, even acknowledging that his no longer has an official number. Like just that it's been rescinded, that he doesn't have an official bounty anymore. But they still have him show off the bounty, establishing obviously that he started off as a whatever close association to a pirate he probably would have. I don't know what Mihawk sees himself as. Anyway, they show the bounty. Other interesting change is having Garp established this early on and having him be the one to reach out to Mihawk. So, okay, maybe I should start with the actual beginning of the episode. I apologize. Having Garp right from this early on in the story is a very interesting decision from the live action creators. And I'm curious, as with everything else, how much of this just came down to their own decision-making process and how much of this came down to some sort of dialogue or compromise with Oda. Like, how much of it did he know about and how much of it did he actually go along with or actually, like, encourage? Because so far it's been pretty consistent. It's just interesting because of having him introduced to this early on changes the way not only that the characters bounce off of Luffy, but also like the expectations for the audience that sees this through the live action perspective. But yeah, having the interaction with him and Luffy is much more antagonistic right off the bat in this one, ironically, considering how it happens in the other versions. Won't get into that. But still humorous considering that in this version he goes right off with the cannonball strategy. And also humorous that you can definitely get the impression that he's not really trying to kill Luffy. That's pretty obvious, especially the multiple times he makes a point of that. Like, first he tells them to not fire at the ship to destroy, and then later on with Mihawk, he'll reiterate that part. It's very obvious that this is not, oh, I'm gonna hunt down and kill my grandkid because of this. It's basically the closest thing this can be to a family, feud. It's like, my kid's going off being a pirate. You know how it is with them kids. It's like you're definitely giving old man energy. It's still cool because it helps with what will happen with Kobe in the later scene. So, okay, move back to setting up Mihawk. Mihawk's introduction somehow both, obviously because of the effects, can be both goofier than the other version, but undeniably more awesome than the other version. Sorry, got cut off. And the interaction with Mihawk, as I said, effects make it look, can look kind of silly, but in reality, the simple fact is it genuinely is a cooler way of introducing him. Because in the original version, it's mainly just hype. It works well at the time of execution, but it relies a lot on just characters constantly telling you, oh man, this dude is Mihawk, he's such a badass, this famous dude, he's so badass. And so after that, it gets better in the other versions, where it's like it relies way less on just telling you that you need to be, they'll still do that, but they find better ways of like hyping up a character. But here it's like, now we're just going to show you Mihawk just absolutely curve stomping a bunch of pirates. We obviously see the end of it, not the beginning, but it's still cool because, again, it's in character. The only thing that's, again, possibly debatable is his way of interacting with Garp, but that's, again, more original than it is, changing anything from the other versions. And it still sticks with his personality because it matches. It's literally telling you, this guy is so good at what he does, fighting a bunch of pirates trying desperately to kill him with a freaking battleship. To him, it's a, oh, hang on a second, I need to take this call moment. The introduction of those new snails is so clever because it basically lets the live action get away with cell phones, even more so than the other versions already got away with that. Same thing with Garp, I keep forgetting. Garp with the snail, seashell, conch shells. I wonder, I need to know what they call that. I need to know what name they gave that thing. Just the megaphone. And so, same thing, Mihawk still looks cool, gets to absolutely devastate. Again, the only people who are gonna have a real hard time with this, well, actually, no, that's not true. There's two kinds. One, Don Creed fans. You are who you are, I guess. And, understandably, people who are worried that this is going to cut into the Sanji stuff that's supposed to play off in this arc. We have one more episode to go, which definitely, based on the name, the next episode is going to focus much more on the Sanji stuff. So I'll have to wait and see for that episode whether or not this version kind of drops the ball or not on that. But as far as the Mihawk introduction goes, for me it's a plus, honestly. The only thing missing in this version of Mihawk's introduction is we didn't get to see his boat. For those of you who don't know, not a spoiler for anything beyond this, it's in his introduction he shows up on a tiny, it's the kind of boat that you use like a lifeboat. And you never see him row it, but the implication is he either does or he has like an invisible sail that just magically gets him where he needs to go. It's meant to go with his cool factor because he's like riding a coffin. But it would have just been freaking hilarious just watching this version of Mihawk just sitting on that thing, trying his hardest to make it look cool. He does that in the other version, so it's not again, I'm not dissing it on this version specifically. In regards to this version, Baratie looks freaking amazing. Seriously, the sets in this show, I am becoming more and more in love with the designs for these places. I can't, it's only going to be hard to imagine how they do, the things that come after this. But Baratie looks cool. It looks definitely like they're trying to give it a much more fancy restaurant vibe than what the original would go for, which is more of a sailor, out and about restaurant. Still a restaurant. It still goes for that in the other versions. But this one definitely wants to go, we're a high fancy level restaurant. Less focus on the kind of people that run the place and less of a focus on, quote unquote, how it works and just, look, it works, don't worry about it. And the setup here where, for the first thing, the fact that there's way more people in this version on account of actually seeing the ships that are surrounding the place versus the other one where you just kind of have to assume people show up on their boats, but they don't stick around in the other version. But yeah, you have the boat thing here. Sorry, the Baratie. Starts off, introduces the characters. Usopp, cool costume, where he's like already wearing the captain's outfit. already trying very hard to sell himself as the captain. And he even like references later when he runs into Mihawk. Fascinating scene, because that never happens in the other versions. So it's just really funny watching Usopp trying so hard to be cool next to a character who has, in universe, he has to do zero effort to be cool. Speaking of someone who tries very hard to be cool, we got Sanji. So two key things: loudmouth, foulmouth. I think he's the first one to genuinely swear. And well, no, it was either him or Seth. But it makes sense. Both of them would have probably sworn. And his inclusion of immediately hitting on Nami. Interesting, they didn't have him hit on the other woman in the show. I mean, he kind of like winked. I think kind of like looked. But it's not like in the other versions where he like straight up just starts, hitting on her. It's even more messed up in the other versions because he's doing it when she's clearly on a date. Here, he just beats up the other two, moves on to the Straw Hats, and then immediately starts hitting on Nami. But again, as with everything else in the live action, it both tones it down and, tries to like avoid the more cringy aspects of his dialogue in the other versions. You can argue it's kind of, irrelevant because he still comes off as what he is, depending on your depending on your personal view of it. It's either a simp or kind of I forget what the right term for it is, but it's just the fact that he hits on women a lot. He's going to be hitting on Nami a lot if this goes on. Be interesting to see how that dynamic goes off. Didn't interact with Zoro in this episode, so that's going to be interesting to see whether or not that pays off in the next episode. And just his overall personality. They already set up a difference in this version where, again, I imagine it's for the purpose of the pacing. This version of Sanji is already comfortable with, just going for his thing. But they acknowledge that he's, like, not ready to, like, leave the Baratier. They don't say why. We'll get to that in the other episode. So instead, it's focused just on the surface level stuff, only hinting that there's more going on. Because on the surface level is, okay, he's a fancy cook with a bad attitude, quote unquote, but also he, wants to do more things, and at the same time, he is a good guy at heart. At least, in general, because interacts with the one surviving dude from the Don Creek Pirates, whatever the heck their name is in this version, and instead of, anything else he could have done, he's like, now I'm feeding him. It's a very simple thing, but it's very important to his character, and I like that they kept it, despite how maybe forced it was to like set up that encounter, because it keeps something important for Luffy's character and Sanji's. For Sanji, it's the simple fact that, he will take care of you. It's not about class, making money, none of that. He just wants to feed people. And it's important for Luffy because up until that point, the setup for Sanji, for Luffy is, okay, you can fight and you can cook, which are good qualities, but those are all like pragmatic stuff. So having that encounter with the survivor of Mihawk is important because it affirms that something that Luffy cares about is the kind of person you are. And that's a consistent thing, which I like that even this version, with as short a fast pace as it needs to have to get to where it needs to go, doesn't forget to include that stuff. The same thing with the banter between the crew. If anything, actually, this version arguably puts way more focus on the dynamics of people than the action stuff, which is fine because, again, this version can do sets and it can do character stuff as well, if not better, than the other versions. The one thing it's always going to struggle with is the action. Speaking of that, we got before I get to that, gotta go to the world building stuff, and specifically I forget when this stuff starts popping up. Sorry. The encounter with stuff where Kobe is dealing with the Marines. And the fact that they already call out the moral complexity of the situation that the Marines and pirates will find themselves in this setting. Like, they don't just move past that stuff to get to, quote-unquote, the cool stuff in the show. They actually take time to address that. And they do it in a very clever way by having the Garp and Mihawk thing happen. Have Kobe conveniently eavesdrop on it, because then it's not about the setup, like, oh, Garp, it's about how this new setup affects Kobe's personality and how he's meant to view this situation and how he's meant to react to it. That's a very good touch, because it's tackling that idea of what, quote-unquote, doing the right thing in this place really entails. It helps establish Garp's overall viewpoint. I'd argue in a way that helps color a lot of stuff that will happen later in future storylines, which again is an interesting way of this story to adapt it, because it avoids the trouble of having to speculate character motivations in the future when you have conversations like this that can work to imply characterization but don't waste time by, you know, elaborating too much on things that we don't need to care about at this point. So same thing, stuff with Mihawk. The way Mihawk just saunters into Baratie, not a worry in the world, interacts with Zoro, and then the stuff for the finale is the stuff for Zoro and the other Straw Hats. Both a touching moment, but also a really silly moment that I like is once Zoro's already made up his mind, and then the crew are on, I'm assuming, the inside of the Going Merry, Nami trying to talk him out of it, and then him just kind of sticking to his idea. When he brings it up to Luffy, he's like, alright, back in the yard in the Marine base, what was the thing I told you? And then Luffy just starts referencing all the other stuff Zoro mentioned. It's important, I think, because, again, it's about characterization. The fact that, A, Luffy actually bothered to remember, funnily enough, every single thing Zoro told him in that conversation, but also the fact that he's kind of an idiot, so his social cues aren't that great, and so he doesn't just recall which part of the conversation they had would probably be the most important here. Instead, he's like repeating every line, and then he catches up to it. Again, he's kind of dumb, but also not that dumb thing that the live action tries to do. As with everything, the ending sequence with the Mihawk stuff is trying to get to that tightrope of doing what the original does, but also kind of toning it down. The obvious stuff is when Mihawk and Zoro fights, they have a lot of the same specific moments, the important parts, but they tone down the blood, funnily enough. It's considering, where they start in this version of Zoro's encounter, with the Mr. 7 guy in the first episode, and in this version, in the fight with Mihawk, if you compare it to the other versions, again, it's not super different in the, quote-unquote, not like he's getting dismembered or anything. And they still show the big scar he gets at the end. I just mean, there would obviously be a lot more blood in this fight if they were being completely accurate. But again, that's not really the point. What is the point is the interaction between him and Mihawk sticks pretty much to the original. The parts I don't think I care for are two things that they left out. One is, but there is one thing they added which I like, but it requires them to change the story, so we'll see how that plays out later. The stuff I don't really care for is One, they left out the fact that in the original versions of the anime and the manga, they make sure to show you that this event is not just the other members aren't just passively taking this in. Now they do show you that they are obviously very scared and traumatized for Zoro's sake. You know, they're afraid that their friend is about to die. But in the other versions, they actually show how some of his friends actually try to jump into the fight, only for Luffy to be the one to stop them from doing it, but clearly showing that Luffy, he's not doing it because he doesn't care. He's doing it because he cares so much for his friend's dream. Like, he gets the fact that for Zoro, dying in this moment is preferable to having to, quote-unquote, lose the wrong way. Like, having to be rescued, not being able to just survive on his own. Like, he doesn't want to die, but he'd rather face it than, deal with the stigma of not doing it the right way for him. It's like the whole thing at the end, which they kept. Having wounds on the back is a shame for him. It's all part of the motivation for Zoro's character. But like I said, the thing I don't like is that they don't keep the part that's very important for Luffy. They only keep the part afterwards when he mouths off to Mihawk. That's in character, but it's like less important for me than the fact that he was ready to let his friend die, and that was taking a lot out of him to do. It wasn't something he did, casually. It wasn't something he was like, oh yeah, sure, just die in a duel. I don't care. Again, they show he cares, but I just think they could have found a way to add that in. Maybe have Usopp be the one to try to save Zoro, and then have Luffy be the one to talk him out of it. He's right there. Now, in this version, they focus on the Nami stuff, which, again, we'll see how that plays out later, but I appreciate it from a character perspective. I forgot to mention it. That scene between her and Zoro, the drinking scene, great scene. I love it because it references the fact that the two of them are probably the biggest alcoholics in the crew. Yeah, probably. And second, because it's a nice dynamic we don't get to see a lot in the other versions of the story. They definitely have a personality that would gel well with each other, and it's just cool that this version pays homage to that. The other thing I didn't like in the ending, which might be controversial, I don't know, it's Zoro should have cried in the more. Like, this was not an easy moment for him. He's in pain, that's obviously the point, but this was a big thing for him. And I think the lack of inclusion of that is based on a very shallow expectation of the audience, which is that it's gonna make him look bad. And I hope that's not why, and I hope I'm overreaching here, because I really hate that idea. I hate the idea that having the character show emotion, show sadness in such a powerful, tragic thing for him would be seen as, like, oh no, that we need to let him look cool. We need to keep his dignity. But like I said, I might be overreaching here. And hopefully, that's not why. They just did it because, like with everything else, they want to tone down. And even if it's warranted, the crying is more of an overdramatic reaction for the purpose of an anime and a manga than it is maybe in live action. But again, it's just in the perspective of, oh no, we can't have them cry. Let's have them do maybe one tear, like they do with Nami, like just one very powerful emotion. Then, I do apologize for anyone who is watching these up to this point and being like, man, this guy rambles kind of like sporadically. I do apologize. I genuinely do, because I'm not going at these in a super structured format, like script-wise. I just try to go off the cuff, try to go as genuine. I watch the episode and then just immediately start doing these recordings because I want to give the most honest, immediate reaction to what I saw. at risk of obviously coming off kind of, well, to be frank, idiotic. But suffice to say, apologies, this might very well be my favorite episode of the season so far, in mainly character detail sort of ways. So I'm actually very interested, again, in the fact that this is probably where I'd say, if I had any hesitation towards they're changing stuff, like this is the episode that I think for a lot of people might be the make it or break it moment for the show. Maybe I'm giving a little too much credit to the other episodes in their consistency, but we'll see. Well, I haven't really watched that many reviews ahead of time for obvious reasons. So we'll stop at episode 5, and in the next episode we'll see more of what I believe, based on the title, we'll see more of Sanji's character and see how this version does. So, see you all then.